I bring you greetings from the enemies of the people. I want to tell you a story about not so much the sharing of information about genomes amongst yourselves, among scientists, but with everybody else. And I'll just give a very personal story because not all that long ago, I got an email. I was sitting at home one day working, and got an email from a geneticist who asked if I wanted to come to a meeting and if I was interested in getting my genome sequenced. And this was something that I didn't really need to think twice about. I mean, the idea that someone would come to me and say, do you want to have your genome sequenced, after having written about genomes for 20 years or something like that, as this thing that, cost as much as Air Force One, was kind of disorienting, and I was totally on board. So the way that it works is that Robert Greene at Harvard University was organizing one of these Understanding Your Genome meetings that Illumina was involved with. Obviously, Illumina is involved with this meeting too. In any case, so they were going to have a meeting where they're going to, if you haven't been to this sort of event, you go to a meeting, you hear a lot of talks by some of the people here, for example, about where genomes in medicine are going. And if you sign up and you pay, you get your genome sequence. So I talked to my editors in Stat into paying for it. It was, I think, around $2,500. And I promised them a great story. Don't worry about it. It's going to be great. Because I'm going to get my genome sequenced. And I'm amazing, so there you go. So something like that. They fell for it. In any case, so I get this in the mail. This is like a little card. And you open it. And let's see if I can get this video to start. Maybe I press this. There's a little window, and there's a little video that starts playing in this card. And I'm like,
as a progressive thinker,
that's
as
me.
a pioneer in pursuit of personal genomics,
Yes.
we welcome you to the Understand Your Genome community.
Okay.
It's an amazing
I don't know
time
who she is.
in medical history.
It is.
And you're about to join the ranks of only a
Thanks,
fraction of a % of the human population to actually hold your genome in your hands.
Okay. It goes on for a couple more minutes, but I certainly felt like I was much more special than I was before. I'm not. Look, I am only gently criticizing the people at Illumina who wrote about this stuff, because I have to write about this stuff too, and I know how tough it is. So take it in that spirit. But it's interesting, the language that we use when we're trying to talk about genomics, and why it would matter to get your genome sequenced. So if you recall, they said you'll be able to hold your genome in your hand, and they showed this. So I guess she's holding a genome in her hand, but that doesn't really, I wouldn't be able to know anything if I held my genome in my hand like that. And really, and when you think about it, like, I'm holding a genome in my hand right now. I mean, I'm like a billion of them, but I can't tell you about it. So how am I going to get something out of this? Well, so they went off. I had my blunt drawn. They sequenced my genome, and I get back in the mail a true genome predisposition screen clinical report. A wonderful genetic counselor named Sonia Sudi sort of walked me through it over the phone. She said, "Look, we're just going to talk about this on the phone." And I was like, "What does that mean?" And she says, "Well, what it means is that you got nothing." Like I didn't have to like come in and like sit down. We gotta talk. It was just like, you've got nothing. From the things that they looked at, nothing. Okay. So they also do carrier stuff. We're all carriers. They identified 2 mutations that I have as a carrier. I have 2 children, and they're in their teens years, and so like I'm not worried at all about this, because if they had familial Mediterranean fever, I'd know. by now. And you know, I probably got this from my dad, who's Ashkenazi Jewish. My wife's all Irish. This is not an issue in Ireland. So I think we washed out our kids' gene pool. So okay, so that doesn't matter either. So recently, Illumina. So that's not just what Illumina will give you. Like some of these other places, they will provide you with this, which if you don't really know anything about genomics, looks like, I don't know, what do you think it looks like? Wallpaper, I guess. It takes a while, my point is it takes a while for you to understand what you're looking at. Now, what they also do, and a lot of other places do, is they say like, okay, if we can't scare people to death with telling them they have a horrible mutation, then maybe there are like other well-supported traits we can tell them about. So this is what they told me. Your odds of developing male pattern baldness are increased if you are Caucasian. Caucasian. A luxuriant full head of hair. So, you know, I don't know what to do with this information. Your muscle fibers are built for power. I beg to differ. And so remember, I just got my editors to sink some money into getting this genome. If this is all I had, I think they'd be pretty disappointed. And you know, I guess part of the problem is that I think it was a problem is that I'm not a very sick person. I have decent health, and I don't have I don't have a very rare disease. But I just sort of felt like, well, that can't be it. You know, that can't be it. I mean, we're talking about the human genome, and it is pretty amazing. I mean, I sympathize with that sort of feeling of awe in that video I showed you before. You think about it. I mean, think about what it really means that we have this genome inside of us. Actually, somebody at a TED Talk went to the effort of actually printing his genome in books, and he filled up all these books. You know, and it is an extraordinary text that's in there, and I can't believe that there's nothing that I can find out about it. Well, but I knew enough from having reported on genomes that the experience I had had is not really how scientists actually deal with genomes themselves as a research object. So I actually started reaching out to people, some of whom are in this room. So I said to Dan, for example, like, I got my genome sequenced. What do you think I should do? And I want to actually get hold of the data. And he said, oh yeah, I'll put you in touch with a couple people. But first I had to get the data, which was not easy. I won't go into the details here, but I had to pull a lot of favors and sign a lot of forms and pretend that I was part of a research study, I guess. I guess I'm being studied for my reception of receiving my genome and writing an article about it. I've got the paperwork, I can show you. Anyway, one day it shows up, a hard drive, 60 gigabytes of these little fragments. Basically, you know, I think of it as the spreadsheet from hell. And you know, so I've got it now. I can hold it in my hand, but I still have no way of knowing what's in it. So Dan said, oh, you got to talk to Conrad. So I went up to Boston and hung out with Conrad, and he filled up several whiteboards trying to explain to me how he was going to break down the data on this hard drive and then build it back up into a form that scientists could then analyze and could really like help me out with. And this, you know, took a while, but you know, then we had some files that we could really work with, and it was. So I started to go to various scientists and saying like, would you mind, you know, sort of taking a look? I mean, let's take a look at my genome to sort of illustrate something you study. And I was surprised at just how fascinated and perfectly happy people were to volunteer to their time to do this. And the way I sort of ended up liking it was you start with all this data, and then you have to then sort of pull out the patterns that are significant to you. And a lot of times scientists are working on data, genomes of people that they will never meet. And here was someone saying, here, tell me, and I'm going to come and we're going to talk about it. So I went to Yale University. Mark Gerstein's group there went really to town with it, and they actually asked me to come to meet them, and we were in this big conference room, all together, a whole bunch of people. And the way I likened it in an article I wrote, I felt like I was the frog that came with a dissecting scalpel, because they were just and they told me all about their analysis of individual Z, but that's me. So then the insights started to come, and then it really started to become really a really intellectually enriching experience. So, for example, I have roughly 3.5 million single nucleotide polymorphisms, these little one base variants from the reference genome, and so they cataloged them all. So what do they all mean? Well, you can look at them in a lot of different ways. And one interesting thing to do is compare them to me to a Han Chinese person, a Yoruba from Nigeria, and you see that the blurring of our genomes is really astonishing. So out of those 3.5 million, there's less than 1 million just in this comparison of two other people that are unique to me. And if you add in more people, this Venn diagram would just basically chop out more and more and more. And so, so when people try to come up with simplistic ideas about race, for example, I think that this kind of thing is very useful. This is a similar Venn diagram showing indels, so small insertions and deletions. And I was able to get the real data for how many I share in common with these two people, how many of them are just of my own in this comparison. And so it's a similar picture. What's particularly mind-blowing is not just that they would show me tell me, okay, you have a mutation in this NAT2 gene, but they actually built the protein for me and showed me how the mutation changed the shape of it, which is pretty cool. And so what happens is that right here, I'm a mutant here. It's a pretty rare mutation, and this is an enzyme in the liver. And this makes this whole enzyme not work terribly well. And so your body actually responds by basically destroying this protein because it's not doing the job, and then you have less of this protein around to do the job it's supposed to do. So basically, there are certain drugs that I may not have a great reaction to. But to actually see yourself, in a sense, in a molecular way is pretty mind-blowing. Ali Turkmani was also here. I asked him if he wouldn't mind taking a look and seeing if I had any protective mutations, mutations that aren't bad but are actually good. He came up with one, which is pretty good, I'll say. Basically, I have a very low, I have a lower than usual risk of developing Crohn's disease. There's a gene that is involved in immune signaling that's broken, and so it basically ends up acting as a brake, so I don't get into runaway inflammation, as it were. And I discovered that people had already discovered this mutation and had worked out the biology, and now there are these drugs coming out to treat things like psoriasis and other autoimmune diseases, and these are big blockbuster drugs, and I have not gotten 1 cent. But it's okay because I didn't know about it until just a little while ago. But in any case, this was a great way to sort of understand how studying mutations is not just about getting predictions about disease, but also about actually ways of developing drugs, something that we were hearing about earlier today. So also, you can go to 23andMe, get a test, and they'll say if you are non-African, they will say, oh, you're 2% Neanderthal, or you're 2.1% Neanderthal, or you're 1.8% Neanderthal. And if you really think about that, like, so what? Like, what does it mean for you to be 1.8 and for you to be 2.1? I mean, does that mean that you're going to be better at killing woolly mammoths? You know, what does it mean? I mean, we have this Neanderthal DNA in us, but these sort of percentages are amusing. And I was wondering, like, if it would be possible at this point to drill down a little further, because, you know, there are non-Africans have different sets of Neanderthal genes that they've inherited, and natural selection may be playing a role in it. It may be drift in other reasons, but they're doing things in us. So it depends on what we have. So I have another spreadsheet from hell now of all my Neanderthal genes that Joshua Akey and colleagues put together. You know, it's sort of interesting. Tony Capra looked at electronic health records at Vanderbilt that he's been studying and comparing to Neanderthal genomes. And he actually looked at mine and he said that, kind of on balance, if he had to say, I have a very, very, very slight protection from depression thanks to my Neanderthal genes overall. And I never thought of Neanderthals as being particularly, you know, giddy people who skipped around, but I also have a Neanderthal gene that makes me slightly at a greater risk of nosebleeds. So there you go. You know, it's interesting to use this as a way to see how the science of Neanderthal, you know, genetic health is proceeding, but, you know, it's not exactly, I would say, news I can use. So my editors were not disappointed in the sense that I actually turned something in. I actually ended up, I'd say a couple dozen scientists ended up working over my genome, I guess you could say. And it was a really, you know, for me it was a really great experience, and it got me thinking about a lot of these issues about the role of genomes, not in medicine, say, for example, to try to prevent Alzheimer's or trying to treat cancer, so on, but like, what's going to happen as genomes become ubiquitous and as they're not just part of like a medical culture, but part of popular culture, where we all have our genomes and we can all look at them, and how are we going to make sense of them? And I don't think this is going away, and I think you need to think about this. After this, I published this genome thing. I've been sort of keeping my eye on sort of genomes and DNA sequencing in sort of popular culture, and you know, I probably don't need to tell some of you here, it's getting increasingly to be bigger business. This is not medical. But you know, they do want $150, marked down from 179. So what you will learn is, I like this line here. What is your ancestral makeup? You know, and because there's this powerful feeling that your ancestors make you who you are. I'm working on a book now about heredity, and I have to say that, you know, this is a powerful, very old concept, an old appeal, and it's something that, you know, in a way sort of drove genetics itself, to the rise of genetics, to answer these sorts of questions. And these questions are not going away, and you have to make sure that people are getting good answers. And that's not easy, because obviously the science is hard. But I'll give you I have a little time left. I will give you an example of how not to do this. And I discovered this just recently. So, I don't know how many of you saw the movie Assassin's Creed. A lot of blank looks. Okay, this was a big movie. Michael Fassbender was in it. It came out in December. It was based on the video games Assassin's Creed. Michael Fassbender plays this modern-day character who, as I understand it, he gets some sort of genetic test, and he discovers that he's descended from these assassins in the 1500s in Spain, and he somehow is sort of transported back in time, and he's able to have all these adventures because he has what they refer to as the warrior gene. I know the plot sounds amazing, right? If you haven't seen it, I'd say don't. The Slate's critic, Jonathan Fisher, said, I suppose you could say the film made me slightly more likely to play one of the games, but only because I just do just about anything before I saw this movie again. But again, this was a big, big budget movie. And why am I telling you about this? Well, guess what? You could, if you wanted to, could order up the Assassin's Creed DNA testing bundle to reveal if you have the warrior DNA. And this is the details of it. Just $89. Okay, and this was provided by Family Tree DNA, a big, genetic genealogy company. It says, for example, now through the Assassin's Creed's DNA bundle, there's no need to enter the Animus to unlock your own genetic memories. With the world's most comprehensive matching database, Family Tree DNA's premier suite of DNA tests enables users to trace their lineages through time, explore ancestry, and connect with relatives across the globe. And then at the bottom, plus, for a limited time only, find out if you have the Assassin's Warrior gene in your DNA. So, as you might guess, I'm a sucker for this sort of thing. So, I mailed away for it. Again, like the baldness and the muscular power, I beg to differ. No, but while this is funny, I do have to bring it down a bit because the whole warrior gene study, I don't really have time to talk about it now, but the whole story of the warrior gene is kind of a train wreck of behavioral genetics. Some of the early work came out of looking at Maori in New Zealand and saying, oh, they have a lot of them have this variant. That must be why they're so violent. That's literally how it came about. And the fact is that if you actually go into the literature, there are some interesting clues about this variant, but this in this review, they say, while it may be tempting to think of MAOA as the violence gene, or you could just say warrior gene, the majority of individuals who harbor common risk alleles at this locus would not meet diagnostic criteria for impulsive aggressive disorders. So the point being that, you can tell me what kind of variants I have. You can tell me about studies that have linked it with some sort of behavior or something or another. But again, there's still going to be a lot of so what. So if the genome really does matter, if it really is going to tell us who we are, then we really have to be able to read it accurately and to be faithful to it and to pursue the truth. Because as we heard this morning, the truth is hard. So in that spirit, I just want to leave you with, everybody's got their database. So Mark Gerstein agreed to just put my whole genome and all the analysis that everybody did just up on this site, zimmerome.gersteinlab.org. It's all there. If you find out something interesting about me, just let me know, okay? Thank you.